All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for giving up one of your summer evenings to join us and discuss the topic tonight, who's in charge of the schoolhouse. Just as a note before I call the meeting to order, that this is the first meeting in our new governance structure, new meeting structure, where we have a committee of the whole and a board evening in the same night. And so we will start with the committee of the whole and then move into a board meeting, I would expect, hopefully around no later than 8:30. So I'll formally call the meeting to order and ask that you all stand and join with us in the singing of our national anthem. Thank you, everyone. All right, Director, can you proceed with roll call, please?
And Trustee Buckman. Present. Trustee Kirkner.
Present.
Trustee Garrow. Present. Trustee McPherson.
Present.
Trustee McAllister.
Present.
Trustee McDonald. Present. Trustee McMillan.
Present.
Trustee McCray.
Present.
Chair Petersma.
Present.
Trustee Richards.
She won't be here.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Okay, a motion to approve the agenda, please. Trustee McAllister, Trustee McMillan. I don't know whether everybody signed in or not. All in favor? Carries, okay. Any declarations of conflict of interest? Okay, seeing none, we'll move in to our only item this evening, and that's titled, Who's in Charge of the Schoolhouse? Trustees, as all of you have been aware, there have we recently saw the completion of a bilateral deal between the union representing the Catholic teachers and the ministry. Many of us have had a chance to read through the commentary and read through the document itself, and have drawn conclusions that, in talking to you, many of you have similar conclusions to mine. I think that this agreement definitely highlights a furtherance of the government's moves over a number of years to consolidate additional power in Toronto. In discussions with some of you and with the director and other people in the education field, it occurred to me that if we weren't careful, we might miss the only opportunity we would have to try to put this subject on the provincial agenda for discussion. We've titled it Who's in Charge of the Schoolhouse, and we really think that that's what we are talking about. We are talking about who the parents, who the community wants or sees is responsible for what happens in our local schools. Anecdotally, certainly my discussions with my communities have always come back that they have a high expectation that local control would be significant and meaningful. However, obviously, we're in a situation where maybe that's changing. Some of us will be able to talk more expertly on the history of the changes in public education, either living through it as a teacher or perhaps even a trustee Buckland. In the last 40 or so years, there has been a significant consolidation of power. And I think that at first it was to local school boards, and then those local school boards were expanded, funding control moved from the local schools to the schools supported by the province, and then now to where the province is solely in charge of funding. And while I wasn't part of those conversations, when I look back at the debates and those things that went on, I could be pacified by the knowledge that I think the motivation was to improve student learning. But increasingly, as I see powers devolve and be more centralized, and looking at indicators, let's look at the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment. You see that Ontario's progress in relation to the rest of the world has stagnated. We were doing quite well, and in fact you could argue that PISA scores were a testament that the history up until the, say, 1998 or so might have been all moving towards schools. Consolidations led to better education, and certainly going forward that was the intention of this board, and has always maintained that focus. But decisions being made since 2003 have really caused me to question whether I have been a trustee during the largest and most significant decline of our autonomy. And I take us back to an event that just occurred to us, but I think was the first signal that times were changing, when unilaterally, without notice, and despite having a plan, the government took money away that we had allocated over a number of years to be spent on our most vulnerable students. As I said, that was done without discussion. It was done with no sensitivity to the fact that we had a plan for the money. Since that time, we've watched the government evolve a negotiation model which was predicated on the knowledge and the understanding by boards and the federations, the only two legal parties to negotiate contracts, that because they were the sole funders, that it made sense to have them at the table in order to deal with the funding side. I think we all agreed that that made sense. But 3 agreements later, we've seen a significant move where they've abandoned the principle of bargaining the funding aspect and have moved significantly into areas of management rights, and in the last agreement, quite extraordinarily, negotiate on behalf of an employee group not even present. The financial changes since 2003 too lead you to believe that the government is abandoning the sense that there was a place for local priorities. We all know the impact of sweatered monies, and more recently the removal of flexibility funding from the GSN into now the non-GSN funded EPO grants. And we have historically hoped that we could squeeze our local priorities into those grants as they come out. Legislatively, we all remember Bill 177. And while many of us tried to put a brave face on it, and I think I was one of those, focusing in on statements whereby they stated that we had sole responsibility for student achievement, and sort of in some unfounded expectation that the ministry might live up to it, and by the fact that they wrote into 177 the need for boards to have strategic plans, something that our board had acknowledged and had in place for years. And despite the fact that our board presented to the Standing Committee on Social Policy and warned them that they needed to change the way they operated to respect our abilities as they were laying them out in 177, I think it's fair that since its passing, we have seen no attempt on their side to honor that deal, and they continue to play fast with their commitments, and not providing stable funding, or in the case of the deal with the Catholic teachers, abandoning our control over professional development. So I bring this forward to you this evening. I think we have a number of things to discuss. Obviously, my opinions are based on conversations I've had with some of you, but not of the whole board. I sense that I am speaking broadly enough to capture everybody's viewpoint, but I thought before we lost this opportunity to speak one last time, before we too were caught up in this same deal, that we would convene, discuss, and perhaps consider sending an open letter to the Premier, which I have a draft here, and perhaps we need to consider sending a letter to OPSPA, giving them some new instructions or asking them to consider some new instructions through our director. So I will pass out what I am proposing. I have a copy here there already. That's the Premier one. Okay. And this is the OPSPA. I'll give you a second to absorb those. These were crafted by myself. I've given David and Jeff just a few minutes to review them. Lisa did a quick spell check, and this is a draft, and it's meant to fuel discussion. Certainly there are a number of things that we can do. This is committee of the whole. There's no real structure here, so I'm looking for somebody else to take the floor and maybe advance the discussion. Trustee McPherson?
I might as well lead off. This has basically brought a lot of things to the fore. Now, I haven't spoken with too many people, some of my local constituents, over the fact that we now have a labor group that is essentially determined the job parameters and limitations for another employee group, and the fact that a trustee association was totally bypassed in the process. Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is the role of trustee? I've been a trustee for 12 years. I have watched that role, I don't want to use the word deteriorate, but I will say become less significant. I have watched that the construction of new schools, instead of being decided by the board, is now decided by a list of priorities, which might, in hindsight, be a better way of doing it. I have seen us go from doing public consultations, which were basically a show of faith, so to speak, to literally doing the entire budget within this room and basing it upon the strategic plan. So all of this has eroded the public's perception of the fact that the trustees are in charge of the system. To be honest with you, the best work I do as a trustee does not involve this table. And you all will experience them when people call you with problems. And one of the most valuable things I take away from this table is the relationship I have with senior staff. Because then when I do get a problem, I usually can negotiate it, or at least bring them people who have the problem to an understanding of why that is. And that is the local part of being a trustee. Every 4 years, as far as I'm concerned, we're convenient cannon fodder for the frustrations that's felt by the community versus schools. And all you have to do is pick up it in the local papers. So I think we've come down to an issue here of local control in a system that is, I will say, 99.999%, and Rick will tell me it's 103%, provincially funded. So we do not have the right of local taxation anymore. If we go back to the good old days, when I was in municipal council, we would scratch and we'd save and we'd try to come up with a single digit increase in the mill rate, and then the school board would hand us double digits, usually, because at that time they took what they needed, subtracted the provincial grants, and sent the bill to the local municipalities. Nowadays it's all provincially funded. So is our role one of advocacy, where we advocate on behalf of our people, or is it arbitration, where we're trying to help resolve issues? And again, when we come down to the contracts, there is an advantage to the provincial bargaining process. You can look at the hospitals. They are all bargained provincially. There is a local hospital board, but their role is limited in that. And so what disturbs me with this whole process is that there was a valid trustees association that literally was not allowed to be part of the process. So rather than asking ourselves who's in charge of the schoolhouse, because I read Bill 177 a couple of times, and guess what? I'm not. If I call any one of my principals up with a concern, he can choose to talk to me, or he can say, I'm sorry, that's not your part of the forest. And essentially, we're in charge of the forest, but we're not in charge of individual trees. But what I'd like to see come out of this process is, yes, I support provincial bargaining. I think this time around, it's going to be something that's going to happen whether we like it or not. My only hope is that we get to have, by extension, I don't want to see 72 different boards at that table. By extension, through the Ontario Public School Boards Association, at least some semblance of a voice at that table. And that's just my spin on it. And admittedly, I spent the last 6 weeks cutting hay and not answering the cell phone. So I've been pretty isolated compared to some of you people.
Lucky to be able to cut hay.
But,
Lucky to be able to cut hay.
yeah.
Art. Trustee Buckland.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I agree with Premier McGinty that we have to do something to prevent bankrupting the province, so that the 15 or 16 billion, whatever it is a serious concern. I think this should be a point that we would make, that we are also concerned about that. But you know, you brought me back to thinking about 1970, when we had no rules at all, and meetings till 3 o'clock twice a week to set up parameters for director and superintendents and so on, until now Bill 177 and then this. It's quite discouraging to see that this could happen. And today's Globe had an ultimatum. I've forgotten the deputy minister's name, perhaps the director knows it, but said this is a template for boards and you've got 6 weeks. We expect you to be open for school at the end of that time with an agreement. If you don't, then I guess the hammer was there. So how do we make a politically powerful concern expressed to the ministry? I think we have to do it through OPS trustees organization. And, you have been in touch with them, I understand, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I can speak to that.
And I think that's about all we have. I don't know if the directors organization has any strength there at all, but we must A, be concerned about the deficit, and B, be concerned about being in on, as the trustee said, being in on any deal that is made, and I think we have to do it through OPSBA.
Certainly, you know, I'll talk a little bit about the conversation I had with Ontario Public School Boards and David, our directors. Also been talking to some trustees as well. I think the question here, when I look back at the history of education, I keep looking for that moment in our history where we said, or I as a parent or as a citizen said, that my vision for public education is to have it run from the Mount Block. What street is it on?
Portmore.
Bloor Street. I don't remember having that conversation. And I think that one of the things that we can ask or can start is that conversation. And if people of Ontario, if the citizens of Ontario, parents, taxpayers, come back and say, you know what, we believe that the best system is one that can be run centrally, and that these are the roles that we want trustees to have, these are the roles we want local superintendents to have, directors of education, then I'm fine with that. But I don't believe that conversation has happened. I do think it's happening. It's just not happening with the people of Ontario. It's happening with executives representing interests far more powerful than ours. And when I see the rapidity to which they will reach a deal when they've eliminated the input of trustees, almost as if they were an irritant, that's when I think that, you know, each of us has to ask. I know each and every one of you, and each and every one of you sacrifices to be here. We put a lot of energy into this. Nobody does this for the honorarium. In fact, most of us find that it costs us far more than what the honorarium ever pays back, either financially or in family commitments lost. And I want to know, just individually, whether I should be putting that much energy into it, whether it really matters, whether at the end of the day the work that we do here at this table means anything. And in the stroke of a pen, they can potentially poison a relationship with an employee group that isn't at the table. I begin to worry that when they can, with the stroke of a pen, eliminate a tactic that we use to achieve the things that in 169 still gives boards the obligation to do, and that is we are solely responsible for student achievement. That is our job. And when I see that, then it's kind of like, do we really need to be here? What is this? Let's look at the facts, folks. We have just seen the beginning of what it's going to be like dealing with transportation. We have a great team. The people that move from this board and the Catholic board to Prescott, to Johnstown, are a great team. They are led really well. But if you think that it's going to be easier for us to resolve issues with that step of centralization, I think we're fooled. It's not going to be easier. It's going to be more of a challenge. There are more parties at the table. There are no longer just one board. There are now 2 boards. There are no longer just 11 trustees. There are 18, 19 trustees. So I think that that's where we need to engage our communities and say, is this your vision? Because as I started off, I don't think that conversation has happened. I don't remember being part of it. And I think that we have a responsibility to our constituents before it's ultimately too late to at least stand up and say, let's think about this, folks, before we coast off in the sunset. So I think that's
Good point.
Trustee McCray.
Well, I think you've made, Chair, through you, Chair, I believe you've made some very valid points. And to be perfectly honest, by reading this article that's right in front of me about the report to the Committee of the Whole and the background and the attachments and all of that type of thing, it makes me very unsure about the democratic process. I was under the impression when I came on this board as a new board member that I would be the voice of my constituents. And it just appears to me by reading these types of things and listening to what you're saying this evening that less and less the voice of the constituent matters to our government. I'm kind of at the point where I'm wondering if our government just wants the trustees to be a rubber stamp for the government, and for the sake of to say that we're going through the democratic process. So yes, I'm in all agreements of writing a letter and supporting the Ontario Public School Board. I'm hoping they will support us with them. Have we been able to find out what other boards are feeling about in perspective to this?
We have been working with Code to try to bring chairs and directors together. Not all parties are as keen to see that happen. I think pretty much all boards are, but it's a complicated subject. We are scheduled to meet currently in September. My feeling is that it'll be too late. We'll be sitting around discussing the aftermath.
History.
I think that we have to understand. I think part of our thinking tonight needs to put in here that we are dealing with probably one of the smartest politicians that we have seen. I mean, it was a stroke of brilliance. He has managed this perfectly to set this up, to run this through in July. He knows perfectly well. He's married to somebody in the education sector, he knows perfectly well that education institutions work around the clock for 10 months and take a break for a couple. And he knows that trustees are busy. He knows that our staff are busy. And this was very, very clever. And so it's very difficult to get people together. Even getting a half a dozen people together to organize the meeting for September has proven to be difficult. I have spoken to OPSBA, and their position, they believe that perhaps it was a strategic error to leave the table, and that's their position, that they're not going to. And I think that's something we need to discuss, because I think honestly, if I'm and I have spoken to our coterminous board, I think honestly, if I am them, having the power to say that we weren't party to the agreement at least gives you some political capital. If we're there, if OPSPA sticks it out and they end up with this deal and nothing better, and they don't get the principal piece out of here, and they don't get PD back in, how can we counsel them to stand up and say, yes, we'll sign that? I don't think the province cares. I mean, if they care to have the signature. I mean, this one has two. This one just has, it's a deal between Ministry of Education and the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association. And so I think that's got to be part of our discussion. You know, at what point do we want the moral authority to say this isn't our deal? And I want to touch on another thing too, and I'm sorry for monopolizing. I've had a couple of conversations with people in education where they kick back the fact that we're a creature of legislation. And I understand that we are, and perhaps this analogy doesn't really hold up. However, so is the province. It exists because of a constitution that we all signed on to. And they only have power if we grant it to them. This government or any other government governs with the blessing of us. And so by extension, somehow them saying or asserting that they have third party or a distant sort of ability to legislate us, if the people of Ontario say that's not the direction we want to go in, and we're prepared to vote for a government or to vote out governments that don't support that, that's democracy too. So even though they have this legislative hold that, yeah, you know, in the latest communication from the ministry, you shall, and if not, we will legislate, is a threat. But we have a threat too. Anyway.
Through you, Chair, I being new, I'm listening very carefully to what Trustee Buckler and Trustee McPherson are saying. We have a responsibility, I believe, to those who elected us to continue to do our job to the best that we can do. We also have a responsibility to those people that elected us to make them fully aware of the implications of what is happening. I don't know too many people that are keen on total centralization of anything by the government, but it seems to be the trend, and I believe strongly that I believe very firmly what Trustee Buckland was saying. We do have a financial problem in this province, as it is in other parts of the world, and I think we, as citizens, have a responsibility to pay attention to that, and I think we certainly should acknowledge the fact that we are in trouble financially as a province. It's a shame that the tactics that are being used have to almost border on bullying or border on tactics that really are not, I think, becoming of the province. I think that we, as trustees, regardless of what our role has changed into, we have an obligation to each and every student that walks through that door to continue to fight on their behalf. And this erosion, or as you put, I'm not sure exactly how you said it, Trustee McPherson, not so much erosion, but altering of our powers, or changing of our powers, or changing of our direction, or changing of our focus, or whatever it is. We were elected for 4 years to uphold public education as the public sees it at this present point in time. I do believe the public is totally unaware of exactly what is happening. And I see that we have two ways of dealing with this. One is to ask OPSFA to speak on our behalf, and or we do it ourselves. And we make a strong stand through a letter, and we speak to our constituents. And I agree completely with you, Chair Petersma, that the timing of this could not be better, because not only have teachers turned their ears off, students turned their ears off, directors are on holidays because everyone works so hard during the year. The timing is perfect. It's when the public eyes and ears are slightly closed that all of this is happening. I do believe we have a responsibility, and the first thing needs to be in the form of, I'd like to see us make that stand. OPSFA, I'm hoping, will realize the seriousness of this and realize that if we stand back and continue to allow centralization to take place, there will eventually be no need for OPSFA. There will be no need for any of us. And that would be a huge shame to our constituents, to be a shame to all of the things that happen at a local level, and most importantly, it would be a shame to our kids.
Carol.
I have a certain frustration with OBSBA and what they have informed us of in the past. When we met with OBSBA at the conference, they informed us of some of the items that the government had put out on the table that they were going to address in the agreements that were going to be made. And those items that we were told about were freezing salaries, freezing gratuities, and cutting the sick leave. And there was very little other than provincial bargaining, perhaps after into the third year. Then all of a sudden we get this agreement from OECTA and the government, and it has bombarded collective agreements, it has bombarded the role of the school boards, and it's affecting the students that we are all responsible for, and that's the part that irritates me the most. I understand that we have an obligation to help get rid of this deficit, and I don't have a problem with that, but when it starts affecting our children in our schools, that irritates me to no end. They've attacked areas such as centralizing the benefits. The one that bothers me the most is the removal of funds for professional development for teachers that in turn will help the students. Assessment, they've got obligations for teachers now to come up with the best plan to assess students. I mean, what does that say about the professionalism of our teachers? They talk the talk, but they're not going to walk the walk. They're not going to give them freedom to choose the assessment. We all know that. They've attacked the occasional teachers and how they're to be treated. And very valuable members of our teaching profession are our occasional teachers and our occasional workers in whatever group we're dealing with. The message that I'm hearing now out in the public is that the question is there going to be unrest in our schools? Is there going to be a strike? Is there going to be this? And are the students going to be affected? My concern is our public education supporters going to think twice about sending them to a public school if they know that the English Catholic schools are going to be running without any interruption. In talking to some of the professionals out there, they were quite content with the fact that perhaps their salaries would be frozen. Some of these other areas they're not even aware of, and I don't think the public is even aware of what the agreement says about how they're treating teachers and school boards and taking away any power, any influence that trustees had. But I think OECTA needs to hear from us as a member board of our frustration. The letter you have proposed is one that I can support. I would really like to see the letter that you have prepared for the Premier to go not only to the Premier, but to go to everyone concerned out there. Of course, the Minister will get it as well, I'm sure. But are we thinking of sending this to other boards under OBSPA, especially the letter to OBSPA? But I sense a frustration. I feel frustrated, and I don't think the public knows enough yet to get frustrated. And maybe our role is to start informing the public as to what really is going on within the ministry and how they're going to treat their children.
We'll take whatever direction from the board, and I think there's a variety of things we can do with the letter. So I'll wait to hear from more. I'm also going to ask Jane to, she did some background work for us, and if you might just verbally focus us in on the points that you believe are the most egregious reach-ins to, say, boards' autonomy. I'd ask that you do that, but just before we get to that, I think in conversation with the Ontario Public School Boards, there was a discussion, well, we need to engage the parents, and we should do that, and I think that sometimes one of our issues when we do go out to the public is that we tend to, we're in education, so we want to educate. We want to give them all the information. We want them to come up with a decision on their own, rather than maybe thinking a little bit more strategically. And I just draw everybody's attention into the recent fracas with the slots and race courses, racing, and how that got spun into downtown Toronto attacking the rural fabric. And I don't think that too many of us can speak eloquently about the ins and outs, the impacts of the specific direction the government was going to go in, but we certainly understood that certain quarters in our rural surroundings were opposed to it, and every time I turned around, somebody was signing me up to another Facebook group condemning the action. So I think that we might need to, because time is short, we might need to think of being more aggressive on bringing parents into the conversation, and that's where I guess in talking with David, sort of the idea of putting out there, like, who runs our schools? Like, who runs our schools? Just asking that question gets people thinking about it, and that, for us, I think would be a big start. Jane.
Okay, thanks, Greg. I thought you asked what would be the areas that would be most egregious to us as a board. I think you've referenced a couple of them. One is the unpaid days and the inclusion of the principals and vice principals in the OECTA agreement, and having had that discussion and them being brought into that fold, so that's one of it. The hiring practices section is significantly different for us than what we currently have. It will definitely restrict our principals in potentially choosing the person or the teacher that's being put in the classroom. That isn't to say we have good occasional teachers, but it's going against some of the hiring practices we have. And it also, because we're in a declining enrollment board, we have significant surplus teachers, especially at our elementary or secondary panel, excuse me. So that is we're going to have to figure out what to do there, because we need to be concerned about our contract teachers who are currently surplus. The diagnostic assessment and testing area is another area of concern. It's definitely not something that we have referenced in our collective agreements at all. It's always been outside. There are some boards that have referenced it, but we haven't, so that would be a big change for us. And I think the Teaching for Learning group would be the area that would have more to say about that than I would, but it would be a significant change, I think, for us. The benefits area, I know Trustee Cartner referenced that. There's been an ongoing discussion for the last 3 or 4 years about going to a centralized benefits structure, specifically with OSSTF and our support groups, and there have been committees that have been meeting on that. There is a push on the education sector to expand that. This obviously opens up the door more significantly. The whole impact that will have on us is, I guess it's wait and see to a certain extent. It's a big project, and I don't think they're as close to being there as they would like to think they are. It's going to be another couple of years before that happens. And I think the only other area that would be of concern for the VP right to return to this teacher bargaining unit is not something we have in our current collective agreement. Some boards do. This would put that in there, so you would have vice principals with the ability to access a teacher vacancy if there was one available within 12 months of their appointment. So that would be a change for us. And then the only other one is the dispute resolution mechanisms. I think we'll now have sort of a two-stream approach. You'll have the dispute resolution mechanism specifically for parameters within the memorandum of understanding that got signed, and if we have one. And then you're going to have the grievance arbitration process, which will be running at a sort of parallel stream, and how that gets sorted through, I'm not really sure, but that would be something you have to work through.
So could something go through both processes?
I don't think so, the way I've read the deal, but it's always that potential, but I don't think so.
And I just so that we understand, this is not a debate about the merits of our negotiations position, and this is really a discussion about how the agreement that was signed might impact our ability to run the board. So on the piece that I'm still confused about is the piece on hiring full-time teachers out of the supply pool.
Right.
So the way that I read that's going to work is that your 5 most senior occasionals who have had a LTO of 4 months and a positive review will make up the entire pool that we can interview from?
It would appear that way, that you're going to have to get into the occasional pool first, and then that gives you more access to a permanent position.
But are we, if there are 5 people who meet all those qualifications, are we still able to interview people from outside the pool?
That's a little gray. It doesn't look like it, but I would say it's a bit gray, and there would need to be some clarification around that. I mean, I think the one good thing is we often hire from our occasional teacher group.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a good thing, but it introduces language around seniority and how you'd acquire a seniority within the occasional teacher ranks, which we don't currently have.
Now, just from my vantage point, it would seem that you could look for a different skill set when you hire an occasional teacher versus hiring a regular classroom teacher. Maybe I'm wrong, but I wonder whether there is that. I mean, they have to deal with, obviously an occasional teacher has to deal with constant change and new surroundings and adapting, where, that's not necessarily the same thing that you would look for in a teacher, you'd think.
If you're talking about a long-term occasional teacher, I would say you're looking for pretty much the exact same skill set, because that teacher is going to be in place for anywhere upwards to a year. The day-to-day occasional, you might be looking for a little bit different skill set, but that's not the group that they're talking about getting into this, I will call it a priority pool, or ready to hire pool. They haven't named it that way, but they're looking at the teachers who've had the experience in long-term occasional assignments. They listed at 4 months, and that's a significant length of time for a teacher to be in the classroom.
Now, in terms of manpower and ability to render a performance appraisal on all those, is that something that we do currently on all LTOs?
No.
So that's going to be a significant change in workload for our administrators.
Yes.
And is it to be the same TPA as currently exists, or is it a new, different TPA?
I think it's going to be a new one, but they haven't released it yet, but I think it will be a new one.
Okay.
Now, our long-term vocational teachers are included in the NTIP process, which is the new teacher induction process. So they're getting some of that already. So now it would be the formalization of the performance appraisal.
Now, does this deal at all tell us how we have to put people into LTOs, or is that still?
There's a priority pool to get into an LTO position too.
And that's based on?
It was based on some parameters, again, to get into it wasn't the 4-month, but there were some parameters put around.
So when we hire into our occasional list now, we have to hire in thinking that this person could be a teacher,
Yes.
full-time teacher. All right, I don't have any other questions. Does anybody have any other questions for Jane just on the impact? Trustee McPherson?
Just a question on I know you've talked about the extra workload and changes in the contract. This whole process is about saving money, but is this actually going to cost us money? Because we're implementing different processes than what we've been using. Just rhetorically, like, has it the potential to cost us money in the long run?
It's interesting that they have not given us a number that this deal saves. Like, it's interesting how that's evaporated from the conversation, leading you to believe that the deals, like getting rid of the sick leave credits, is a magic number. Like that's not even something that we necessarily will pay, right? Like it's not an expense that they can just. It's a long-term liability. It may come to fruition, probably will, but. So I don't know. Has there been any? Have you heard any discussions about?
Just thought I'd ask.
Ian, do you have anything that you want to add to?
I'm always a little cautious because without the implementation specifics of a collective agreement, you wind up over or under reacting. So I'll put that little caveat. So when I just looked at a broad level, I don't know what the economics are of a broader base benefit plan in terms of benefit to board and employees, so I can't really comment on that. The principal return to the bargaining unit is an interesting one because depending on how you look at it, could actually be a benefit, but it could also be a loss. Right now, because we cannot have administrators go back, we cannot, in the short term, if you had surplus administrators, they're really, it's a challenge for us. So the idea of being able to have administrators be able to return to the bargaining unit on that one hand could be a potential benefit. Does it, on the other hand, create more instability in the administrative group, in which case that would not necessarily be a good thing unless somebody's not happy in their role and position, in which case you want stability. So that's kind of a roundabout analysis of the return to the bargaining unit. In terms of the assessment piece, what's really lost there, and I would put PD days in the same thing, neither of those are our primary tools in terms of how we do professional learning or how we conduct student assessment. What is being given up is the opportunity cost should we down the road decide that those were things that we wanted to lever as part of our strategy. Those are no longer on the table. So the risk to those two things is really kind of from an opportunity loss there.
All right, thank you. David, you haven't spoken yet.
Just a couple of quick questions. Jane, this has been negotiated with the Teachers Federation and the ministry. Have any boards signed this, or any boards agreed to the terms that are provided?
I haven't heard of any at this point in time.
The second one then is the item Q within the agreement, page 16, province-wide collective bargaining. In that statement, it indicates that beginning in the fall of 2012, the government will begin to put framework or legislation in place, regulatory framework, to deal with provincial bargaining that will take effect January 2014. What we don't like about this will in fact become legislation and will become permanent. So, do we want to attack this deal, which I think is important, but, or do we want to attack to make sure that legislation doesn't occur, which will remove any discussion that we have in provincial bargaining around this particular item as we move forward, because this is setting the stage for what's going to happen in the next little while. So I know we're upset about this one, but as we move forward, it's going to be even worse. So do we want to focus on, and I think we do need to, and I want to speak to that a little bit further, but I just wanted to make sure that we talk about this, and if Jane, you have any comments or concerns about that particular area.
I think my only comment on that would be that when we are negotiating even today, we are basically in provincial takeover. So there's a provincial representative for all of the bargaining units at the table, and they're talking centrally. So everything that we're getting, I can look at a brief, and I could look at a brief for another board, and I could look at a brief for another board. So with the exception of some areas that are local to us, generally you're seeing the same thing right across the province. And so you have to think of that as you're going through it. So because whatever we're saying is being said somewhere else, and it's being decided, and that's been happening for a while. That happened the last round, and to me, it's occurring even more and more quickly, because we're starting to see the provincial reps at the table right away, as opposed to you might have had 2 or 3 or 4 meetings before that kind of thing happened, and you weren't seeing that.
Go ahead.
Fair enough, but the way I take it is that at least we're having a discussion locally, and we won't in the future.
Well, I think if you look at the healthcare sector, there's still some local bargaining, but and even today, what we bargain locally is not as much as you bargained locally 10 or 15 years ago.
Sure. Go ahead.
Welcome to my world.
Yes, I imagine.
It's centralization. I just, from my perspective, from First Nations, has never worked. It's been really a difficult road, I guess, a difficult road that we're on. And I think just looking at how we have to deal with the federal government, it appears that this is a step that the provincial government is stepping into. And we were always looking at partnerships, and especially on the education side, the academic side, with our students, with the province, and with OPSPA, with local boards. And we achieved that through the agreements we have, because the focus has always been on the students. And I find this really troubling in this sense, but coming back, and I really applaud you for the letters, because I support the letters that you're going to put forward, and probably could be stronger, but however, I think it's they're there because it is a warning that this is you take it away, when are you going to be able to get it back? But the other side of it is that when I look at a lot of boards across the country, and when I talk to other Native trustees, is that we don't give up. We're still at it, with the federal government, but we're really relying on the provinces and OPSPAs and across the province to really be with us in this, and so that's why, and not so much as the province. And, so I just want to make that comment.
Okay, there anybody that has not spoken yet that wants to speak right now? I haven't heard from you, John. Do you wanna...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
To Jane, please. What is your concern, Jane, with regard to the centralization of benefits?
I don't know that I have a concern. It's not, marrying our benefit plan with other benefit plans is a challenge. I know we've submitted a lot of reports and that kind of stuff, and I know that there've been a lot of studies done on the benefit to the education sector on a centralized plan. It hasn't been formalized yet, and we haven't seen all of the benefits, so I really can't comment on that. It might be very good. It may not be. We may have some things in our current benefit plans for our employees that are going to be better than what they will be able to support provincially. But I don't know that for sure yet, John. So, but it's not there yet.
Can I ask you another question with regard to the hiring practices? I was outlined in section L of that agreement, and the role and with regard to vocational teachers and their seniority. And what exactly would be your concern with regard to that?
At this point in time, we have never assigned seniority to occasional teachers or any of our occasional, our support staff. So none of our occasional employees have seniority attached to it. And I think the hiring by seniority directly into positions is something we would have to have some discussions about, because even at our contract teachers, we don't hire by seniority except during the annual staffing process. So there are some, unless there's a surplus, if I remove the surplus requirement, we don't currently staff by seniority directly into jobs, except at certain times of the year. So they've introduced a seniority-based system to something that, one, we don't have, so the calculation of that, and secondly, our current contract teachers don't experience the same seniority-based staffing. So I question how the two would have to work together.
You know, one of the things that I think that we should dwell on here is when the deal was struck, the big deal that we were going to have a trilateral agreement, the assumption was they'd do the money. Boards would do the management. And this deal just so flagrantly abandons that. And this is one of those issues. This is not a money issue at all. This doesn't save them money. It's going to cost us money by looks of it. And they negotiated that on our behalf. And I think that's, one of the things that we have to stay focused on is that, whether this is good or not, it might be. I think, like the benefit might be a good thing. If it's going to save them money, then I suppose it's in their purview. If it's not, if it's just a moving around of control, then that should be negotiated here. That's for us to talk. So I raise that. John. Eric.
Okay, I'm going to ask the director to stop me if I venture into uncharted territory. But, I go back to 1996 with Bill 160, for example, which established, put educators and teachers especially under the Labor Act as opposed to the Education Act. It removed the principals and vice principals from the Federation, whether that was a good thing or not. So I'm just saying that centralization that we are seeing now began some time ago. And, we are still experiencing a lack of stable funding in spite of the Rosansky report. And that's something that we are, I think we as a board have to fight for strongly. So, one of the things that I don't think we as a board and we as a board, as a member of OPSPA, have done very well is increased our coalition building. In other words, we're not fighting, it seems, fire with fire sometimes. And on our employee sides, we've got unions who are extremely well organized, well educated, and I don't mean in terms of their professional education, but educated in terms of bargaining and whatnot. Something that they've done extremely well. I don't think that we as an organization, and I don't mean a board, but OPSPA has done very well. I think that there's a lot there that we can learn from that, and it's time, I think, for OPSPA to become much more strident than it has been in the past. And so I personally strongly support both of these letters, because as you just said, it is a tripartite agreement. It was meant to be a tripartite agreement, even though the provincial discussion tables were designed by nature to be voluntary. But in fact, they become much less voluntary and more imperative. So Yes, you know, is there a role for some hybrid bargaining, you know, between, you know, bargaining at a provincial level and bargaining at a local level? Yes, I do. I think there is a strong role for that kind of bargaining. The goal of government is restraint, and I think that's what we are hearing all the time. I think that's a red herring, to be honest with you, because I don't think that is, you know, our agreements contributed a great deal to the deficit whatsoever. There are certain efficiencies that can be achieved, but the purpose of change has to be an improvement. And I guess the question we are asking ourselves right now is, where is that improvement? And I'm wondering what the vision of our communities is sometimes. When I go back to Bill 177, and you know, it says every board, and that's us here at this table, shall promote student achievement and well-being. Are we doing that? My experience in the past 2 years at least is that the answer is yes, we are. We are indeed doing that. Are we ensuring effective stewardship of the board's resources? Well, that's sort of an interesting question, but by and large, I think we are. Getting some of the details about that is one of my challenges over the past 2 years, but nevertheless, I'm convinced that we are. Are we delivering effective and appropriate education programs to our pupils? I think we're doing an extremely good job at that, especially at the local school level, with the strategic plan that we have in place now. I think we're doing fairly well on that. So, what would our communities want? What would they want us to do differently? I think they would want perhaps a lot less centralization, and I think that centralization would apply not just to the government in Toronto, but even to the board. You know, they would want to see much more local school control, local school initiative. I'm very concerned about some of the initiatives that I hear in terms of further amalgamation of boards. That is plain silliness, frankly, because we are already a big board. If you look at the 4 rooms that are named after the predecessor boards in this building, each board had approximately 18 trustees. We have 11, one of whom is a student trustee. Honest to goodness, you know, they've already dumped a lot on us. So in my former life as a union leader, I faced this exact same situation with the government many times on various issues. And here I find myself on this side of the fence facing that situation once again. And I think we should do just that, is face it. And we have to send these letters, and I concur.
Okay, just before I go to somebody else I didn't even get to the amalgamation and how that's being handled in a way that's totally contrary to really our roles. They announced it. They had a meeting with teleconference, and that meeting there were no questions, and it was directors and chairs. And we were told that they would be meeting with the directors and laying out the parameters and framework. And again, the directors work for us. We've passed motions in the past. David has handed that to them to remind them that they don't dictate. And again, this is, you know, this particular, which I see as a red herring. I don't see them as doing a whole lot with it because I don't see how they make that work. But nonetheless, they did have the meeting. They did bring everybody together and, you know, read the riot act to the boards and to directors. And as far as I know, not one board discussed and provided their director with any direction on what to do. So how could the directors do anything at that meeting until it had been discussed by the board? It's nowhere in his purview or any other director's purview, job description, to amalgamate. I think that would be fair, right, David? I mean, you don't see that as your job to, it's also not in his job to save the Ministry of Education money. And that seems to be what they've created an expectation. David?
I'm not the politician around the table, and I take my direction from you. But a couple of questions that I would ask, and this is, I'm not for or against unions. I, like John, was a chief negotiator for a union with a strong background, and I give a great deal of credit, as John has, to the education I got as a chief negotiator and different things of that nature. It's made me a better director. It's also made me better purchasing a car, I think, and other things you do. A lot of different things, yes. So I can help anyone around the table with John himself as well. But I think you have to ask the question, why did OACTA sign it without their bosses there? What did they gain? 'Cause, I mean, if it wasn't something that they're going to win by and help them, why would you sign it? And the other piece that you have already talked about around the table is the fact that this is supposed to be trilateral. And as Greg's alluded to, the elected trustees, the trustees of the Ontario Catholic District School Boards left the table. And if the union had left the table, bargaining would have stopped. And I think you have to read some pieces in there. And then finally, I think you have to say, potentially, is this an agenda of co-managing boards of education across the province with the union? I think that's a question that you have to ask. I'm not the politician. I think it's an important question. Because there had to be something there. As an old negotiator, there's a lot of things in there that were tough to take, but there must have been some takeaways that said, we can accept this and we can build upon it.
Well, Anne?
Through you, Chair, those are those comments that the director has just made, and there's been many comments made this evening that are really key ingredients that need to go into that letter. And one that I think that we really need to impress upon because of the deficit, and they keep on using that as their rationale for some of the decisions that they've made, is, as was said this evening, what exactly is this going to save our board, and what are the cost-saving measures? And if they can't justify it by that, then why are they doing what they're doing? Why? I would ask them the question, then why do we have boards?
Trustee McPherson?
I've read both your letters, Greg. I think you're pretty much on. I'm going to, first off, I want to remind the board that school boards precede many municipal councils. If you read the history of our municipalities, one of the first things that was elected were school boards. I would like to go so far as to say we precede the provincial legislature, but I don't have my history book with me. I actually would like to see a third prong to this process. I would like to see something go out, and I'm going to leave it up to you or the staff to decide what venue. I would like to see this discussion taken to the communities on the basis not of overpriced staff or whatever other rumor is going out there, based entirely upon the fact that we are fearful of losing local control over our schools. Yes, I agree with John. When I'm talking to a school group in Maple Grove at the Village of Lanark, Brockville is on the far side of the moon. Mm-hmm. My role is, call me the space shuttle. My role is to be the link between those people and the people that sit at this table. And I would like to think at the end of 4 years that I've done a good job, because what Greg says, yep, we make X number of $1,000 a year, but I can tell you there's about 10 to 12 times a year that I'm giving up something at home to be here. And I also want to just toss something up there. It could be a lead balloon, but I'm wondering if we have underestimated or unanticipated the cleverness of this whole debate. If you follow the debate, like I'm pretty active on the computer, I follow People for Education. Previous to this process, we know what the debate was out there, it just wasn't in the community. It was about funding multiple boards. Now, we have this focus on provincial bargaining. Or, as one discussion group was, do we really need local trustees? So, I think that this has really been an interesting summer season. It was timely. Like, I'm sorry, I'm dressed a little too casual tonight. I didn't know it was suit and tie night. But yes, the summer season is when we kind of slow down, kick back a wee bit, and we really don't think much about schools until September rolls around. It's usually in June, but this is twice we've met. So I think there's a whole bunch of things happening here, but I really would like to see the third letter. I'd like to see communication to the community, focusing on the fact, not talking about teachers' contracts and things like that, focusing about the potential for lessening local representation. Because, I'm sorry, centric does not work. I've dealt with government ministries in my life as a farmer, and it can be exceptionally frustrating. What you need is that person that you see in the grocery store to help you through the process. And that's a lot of the role of the trustee.
Yeah, I think this actually goes beyond just trustees, Bill. I think that this is about whether we'll have a local superintendent, a local director of education that reports to the community and not to Toronto. I think that it goes that far.
Yeah.
Like, I think this is
Yeah,
about
I
more
would go
than
that far.
just are we going to have trustees. I think it's really about, where are the decisions going to be made about the operation of your local school. Are they going to be made between high-powered executives on Bay and Bloor, or are they going to be made, at least in part, locally? I think we've, the chance of getting more power is probably absurd, right? We probably all know better. I'm losing track. Trustee Buckland, sir, you've been...
Okay, thank you, Mr. Judge. I want to follow up what the director is saying, and brings to mind power and then potential action. One of the things listed in the elector agreement is, of course, if anyone else gets a better deal, we get it too. So they don't lose anything on that. On the other hand, why not go for provincial bargaining? Universities have it, colleges have it, so it leaves the trustees out of it. We look at the territorial regionalization from townships to counties to regional. We can't really go much further there, but we can. I think we have to argue against anything further. I support your letters. In terms of action, how can we attack the power? Well, when all that money was taken out of English public education in the 90s to form the 4 boards that we have in the area and all over the province, the trustees organization complained bitterly. We couldn't even get the door open. They would not talk to us as a trustee for 2 years. So they had the power, and they said, look, we're keeping it. So I think we have to really be strong in this, and I would say our board represents eight townships, 4 former boards. I think we're strong enough to do it on our own. You suggested that OPSBA says wait and see, we'll hang in there and see what we can do. I think take the letters, force some kind of a meeting. The public can become part of it, I can see that, but it's time for action. This is a serious situation if you want to continue as a trustee.
David?
Thank you. I want to go back, because the last time I spoke, I concentrated on Jane, but I want to go back to the letters first, and there's a few things that I want to touch upon. First, the letter that deals with going to OPSPA. No difficulty with
Just 1 second, sorry. Trustee Swan, have you got a copy of the letter now?
Yes, I'm just reading it.
Okay, thanks. All right, sorry, Trustee McDonald.
I have no difficulty in what's being said in the letter, and I have no difficulty in what some of the trustees have said about OPSPA, and certainly their role to date, or their position to date, when it comes to many things. It is a frustration of mine, in particular, at times, and it's been a frustration of many other trustees about how OPSPA reacts to certain things. And OPSPA generally believes that the operation behind the door is effective, and we can certainly achieve some things, rather than being public and creating potential controversy or creating more debate within the public. So they've taken that behind-the-scenes approach. The difficulty with that, I guess, at some point, is that we don't know, the general public, don't know what's being done to advocate for public education. When we don't create those debates and don't create the controversy, people just believe that it's a union and a government process. So that is difficult. The other difficulty with OPSPA is that it is a large group. So as much as 10 or 11 of us decide that we believe this is important, we need to convince a majority of 20 plus, 30 plus individuals. In fact, I think it's 50. 52, that this is important, and this is the direction that OPSPA should take. And OPSPA has had some difficulty in ensuring that the board of directors take a strategic stance that is very different than what's been done in the past. We have a number of trustees who are very vocal about, critical, I guess, of OPSPA, and they are shot down very quickly. We have trustees who love and just believe that OPSPA does everything right, and we would be nowhere without OPSPA. I don't claim to be one of those, but I don't also claim to be one that criticizes OPSPA all the time. If we decided that this is something that we want to pursue and move forward to OPSPA, I would be very happy to make sure that I raise that through a board of directors meeting. The letter can be sent to all our member boards, and it would be supported through board of directors. Now, if we felt compelled that we needed to do something prior to September, there is wording within our constitution at OPSPA that the president could decide to call a meeting, or 10 directors could ask for a meeting to be called. So if we feel compelled to do that prior to September, then we can certainly become very strong advocates to get support of 10 other directors. Putting that letter aside, the next letter, the letter to the Premier, as much as I support the letter, I have concerns over the letter, and it's not so much the wording or the language that we want to try and place, whether it's strong enough or not strong enough. I first read it, I thought to myself, and I made a comment to the chair that, this should be an open letter to the Premier and published in all media. And I believe that. However, my sober second thought is, what do we gain by that? Because I don't know that a lot of the public understand. And Trustee McAllister, I listened to what you had said, and you can mark this down, I supported and believe what you said through most of it. The one area that I disagree with is the community aspect. I believe there's a tremendous apathy within our communities for education, for municipal politics for that matter. If we look at the municipal election in 2010, we look at the voter turnout was less than 50%. In some cases, we're lucky if we hit 40%. So if we send a letter to, open letter to the Premier, and we address it so that the entire province sees it, or to add to that what Trustee McAllister is saying about going out and making sure that we communicate to our constituents. A good chunk of our constituents aren't even parents. potentially are parents, but not parents with children in our system. I'm not sure that they care whether we lose authority or not, or whether we lose control. I think the chair alluded to that. We need to make sure that we make a connection to how it affects the economic benefits of our communities when we lose some of those controls, or when we don't have inputs into how we can educate our young people. There are some benefits, I think, to this memorandum of understanding. I think there's some good things in there. I'm concerned with some, but I think there's some things that, it's not a big deal. And I think it's just an evolution that we're going to actually see provincial bargaining, and we won't have to discuss this at all at some point. But moving forward, I think we can try and do some things to retain the rights that we have, and make sure that we have some public interest. But I'm concerned that we just send a letter as this, that will fall on deaf ears. I don't know that people understand what's happening in the province enough to say, you know what, I support Upper Canada on that one. Or if we send something out to our constituents and our parents, you know what, there's those trustees just complaining again. They want something else for themselves, or it's a fight with the union, whatever. It's going to be perceived in many different ways. Until we can make a connection to say that, are you satisfied with the fact that your hospitals are in the situation that they're in, which is provincially run to some degree. We need to make sure that we make those connections, the connections to the economic benefits for the future in our communities. Whatever we need to do, we need to be very strategic about it and think about it from a communication standpoint. It's not as simple as just sending out the letter. I'm concerned about that. Supportive of the content, but I just think if we want to try and gain champions for this, we need to think about how we do that. If I go back to some of the other comments that were here, Trustee McCrae asked why is the government doing this if it's not saving money? I think we're criticized of that sometimes as well. When we do things in our community, say to us, why are you doing that? I don't want to say that we do this and we answer this, but I would perceive, or I would predict that the government would say, well, we're doing this because we want to have a more rigorous education. We want to ensure that our students are meeting the needs, and trying to, I guess, to get to Chair Petersman's comments or highlights within his letter to the Premier, that our students in Ontario are going to be the best students in the country, or in fact in the world. They may also say because we can. I'm not sure that they would say that, but I think that's their genuine belief that they're doing that. That's the way they will sell it to the communities. And if we are not careful, we're going to look like we're just crying to try and preserve some power. Some power to be a locally elected trustee, which, as we said earlier, is nothing. But it's perceived in some of our communities that it is something. So it's very difficult, I think, on how we approach this. I think we need to be strategic, cautious, and understand that what the community ties to education, is not necessarily the concerns that we see as a result of this deal that's happening within the Catholic Teachers Union. So, I think we can move forward, but I'm concerned about if we're trying to get the communities involved, how we make that messaging happen.
I think that Trustee McDonald, you're right. We have to be very, very careful about how we present the arguments, and that's why I think that it's important that our ask is to have the conversation. I mean, that's really, I think, what we have to focus on. I mean, as much as I believe that I add value, maybe the fact is that people don't want the added value that comes from a local trustee. And I guess what I'm saying, and I maybe we all need to reflect on this and think about whether that's what you're saying, is that I'm willing to live with what our local communities say. If they come back and say, no, you know what, you were useful, but now it's no longer, I would live with that. I'd rather know. I'd rather operate under that rather than standing up in front of a group of parents who look at you bewildered because you've told them that online learning can't happen, or we're having trouble staffing libraries because of deals that are created and constructs that are created in rooms that we don't even have representation in. That's what I want. And I think that that's where we need to get to is being able to honestly answer that to our communities. We've done, I think, as a board, a pretty good job of shielding our communities from a lot of that. If you look at the last two or the last social engineering project by the government with their PPM 150, the food, I mean, I think we've really done a good job. We've preserved cafeterias where other school boards have seen them go. And I think that we've protected our communities from that impulsive decision made by the government. Same thing with the implementation of the school fees. We took some time to ensure that it could be done right and that we were all lined up and ready to go, rather than in just a few short months turn something around that had the potential to be disruptive. So I think that we've given our communities a certain, we've isolated them. Maybe that hasn't been a good thing. Maybe it'd be better if we had let them see the ongoing
Democracy.
yes, thank you. But I agree with you that if we're not careful, we could create it. And that's why I think that just asking our communities the question, like, do you want decisions made? Do you want the decision of who's the principal of your school made in Toronto? Is that where you want that decision made? Because, it's moving that way. And if it's not Toronto, maybe it'll be Kingston. Maybe they'll have a regional office in Kingston. Is it better in Brockville, or is it better at a family of schools level? Anyway, Trustee McPherson.
Well, I still think we need to involve the community at a certain level. And even on Saturday, I was at one of my workplaces, and I had a person ask me a question about Van Cleek Hill. And they were coming through town. Even if a person disagrees with you, even if somebody says what you guys did with such and such was so wrong, it still means they care about education. And I think that, quite honestly, the whole experience of the $10 million deficit, for me, boiled down to one thing, was don't try to draw a line in somebody else's sandbox. And what we have to be careful here is that we don't end up playing in somebody else's sandbox all the time. We need that degree of local representation. And I'm sorry, I don't care if I've got 400 people mad at me over something in a community hall. And I think I've come close to that a couple of times. At least when I leave that night, I will know that they are still enjoying local representation. Because whether I agree with them or not, I will do my best to represent them at this table. So I think we need to take a measured approach. We don't want to make any grandiose statements that, oh, it looks like they're just trying to hang on to their job. But I'm sorry, if you do not attempt to put the right information out there and stimulate, you have to stimulate the debate. We need to plant that seed. The bottom line is that from my position, I have watched the role of public school trustee slowly be eroded practically every year by a little bit. And at some point, the communities are going to have to say, and if it's only 25%, if it's only the parents, if it's only the grandparents, it's still worthwhile. So I think you're missing an opportunity here. Your letters are, like I said, they're to the point, but I would certainly consider a letter to the editor or something like that. Anyways, that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, Trustee McCray.
I think the most important thing in all of this is, I guess, you know, Ray, you made the comment that you could, you know, ask the parents, and you'd feel better if you went to the parents or your constituents and they said, we don't need, you know, we possibly don't need trustees, and we go that way. I guess I'm wondering, who represents the students or the parents when there are problems and challenges? And if you think of the railroad of information they have to go through in order to get help in Toronto, I mean, it's difficult enough on the local level without having to go through that whole railroad of communication to get to the top to make a change in a program or a change in a route of a bus or whatever. And I think of all the calls that I've got since I become a trustee. And sometimes it's just minor tuning, you know, or a misunderstanding or that type of thing. And I'm wondering if that was lost, who would be there to advocate for the parents and to help them? And to me, that's one of the greatest roles that a trustee plays, is that role. So I'm just concerned about that, and I agree with Trustee McPherson that at a community level there has to be something said there. Of course we have to be careful as to what that message is, but I think the most important part is the voice of the parent, the voice of the student in all of this.
Well, I would think it would be more akin to now what happens if you're not happy with the way your hospital operates, right? Like, I don't think, it would never dawn on me to call one of the governors or boards of directors. I think that it would just evolve into that, where you just, you know, have frustrations and that would be monitored, I guess, and then maybe, I guess in some areas in the country they've established ombudsmen that you can appeal to, and I don't disagree that we would lose something, but we need to have this conversation just so that people know. You know, the
Well, that's
apathy
what I'm
that
saying.
the apathy that Trustee McDonald speaks to, I think, is definitely there. We all know it, right? I mean, like, look at what happens. Like, there are some things that happen that you wonder, well, why don't I get phone calls about that, right? And is it just no one cares? Now, mind you, you do something at a local school, you change a bell time, whew, then people call you. But if we don't score well on a provincial test or something doesn't work well, like, you know, we all watched, you know, our you know, our OSSLT. Well, how many of you had a parent call you about OSSLT? Nobody called us about that, right? I mean,
I did a few.
well, I had zero people. And I think that's probably the more, you know, that's generally the way, and yet, so I agree that there's,
People don't generally call unless there's a problem.
I would think that kids not reading is a problem, but, you know, that's just me.
No,
I
but
mean,
I'm just saying,
yeah.
that's when you hear from them.
David?
Just to share with the trustees a bit of working at one time the largest board in Ontario. Let's remember, and I don't say this to be cheeky or disrespectful, but Toronto's the big dog. And you've got to think about a trustee. What would a trustee be doing in Toronto different from you? What would be happening there? And in the eyes of this, I think it's very important to recognize, do they have your experience? And having worked in a large urban board, it's a very different experience. They mistakenly very often phone their counselor. And very often the counselor directs them back to the principal, back to the school. I think we have to take a look at that. That this is still a Toronto versus the province issue as well, urban versus rural, and different things of that nature. That's really a part of this as well. And I think if you take a look at that issue, it crosses to the union as well. And around this table, we have several people who've been in the big unions that. Toronto's a big voting member, and when they decide to bark, everybody barks. Everybody looks, what's Toronto going to do in this particular motion? What's going to happen? Because it's a democracy in all the situations, and that's what happens. And I sat there at different tables and different committees over the years, and I think the other issue you have to, as a group of trustees, recognize is that this also center versus the outer area. It's a central versus decentral issue. That's also a big issue, and it's charmingly, or perhaps naughtily said, that if you can't see it from the CN Tower, is it really Ontario? And I think you have to, I don't think that's true. I think that the government works very, very hard to work with the farmers and the different groups, but that's an issue involved in this as well.
There was a letter, you probably all read it, and Citizen that speculated on, or suggesting, that you didn't need trustees and what was their value and boards, and I remember reading it and having somebody point it out to me, and the question, and it did come up, somebody did follow up with a letter that I immediately posed to the person who brought it to my attention was, nobody asked this question of MPPs or MPs or to a large extent municipal politicians. It's always trustees that get picked on as the elected officials nobody needs. And yet, guys, we have an MPP that has an office staff gets paid as much as all of us put together. And, does he work more? Well, maybe, maybe he does. I don't know. And yet no one looks at their role and says, well, maybe we don't need MPs. I mean, they all vote the way the party tells them to. Anyway, what's the point? Why don't we just elect three leaders and let them go at it? And, why do we have MPPs? No one asked that question. And yet it's always so cheap to come with the local school trustee. And it's time that we push back and point out that that's just, that there is a real role. And to listen to Trustee McRae speak about it, there is a real role. Now, I know I'm doing a lot of talking. Trustee McPherson.
Yeah, I just brought up a question, and thank you, Greg. Back when, maybe nobody could answer it through the chair, back when they amalgamated school boards, municipal councils were amalgamated under similar legislation.
Some, yeah.
Yeah. There were holdouts in my area, I think of Montague and Beckwith, that decided to go it alone. And yet, there were no school boards that resisted that momentum, the same as some municipalities. I guess it's entirely rhetorical, did school boards, I know, speaking to Art and some of the other trustees, they fought it tooth and nail, but eventually everyone rolled over and amalgamated. Now they're talking of amalgamation again. So could school boards stand up and resist this momentum the same as some municipalities? I guess North Augusta near Brockville, I guess maybe Frontenac Young as well. So there's a few municipalities just simply told them what to do with their legislation. Now, are we under a slightly different act in that we can be forced into something like that? That just came to me. And
Trustee McDonald?
Just to pick up on that, I didn't really want to talk about that, but just from a municipal standpoint, I spent a good chunk of my working career in municipal government, and the municipal government piece was legislated to get rid of two-tiered municipal governments. So regional type governments were eliminated and reduced so that you had single-tier municipalities. And in most cases, those regional governments were single tiers were amalgamated. Where there were single tiers or separated municipalities from a county system, they really were left alone. In the county systems, they were encouraged to reduce, and it was some plans submitted and move forward. So they were really looking after the regional type governments more so than anything, which were the ones that were costing money. Two levels of municipal government that just kind of perpetuated bureaucracy and life in politics that some would say graft to some degree. In any event, I want to move on to, I want to make sure that people don't misunderstand what I'm trying to do, what I tried to say earlier. I'm not suggesting that we don't go to the communities. I'm just suggesting that we need to be very careful on what we say, because what we say may impact us in a negative way. So I think rather than sitting here and saying we need to make sure that we go to the communities, I think we need to make sure we talk about how we want to go to the communities. I think we need to make sure that we understand that we're going to go to OPSPA, and are we satisfied with this letter, or are there other actions that we want to do? Try and move towards the actions that we can potentially do, as opposed to I think communicating more that we need to do something. We've all had an opportunity to do that, and I'm sorry, Chair, I'm kind of stepping on your toes a little bit, but I think it's important for us to make sure that we have some action associated to it, because if we continue to talk about what we should do, it's going to be September.
Right. I agree. And I don't want this to go on, sorry, go ahead, Trustee McAllister.
I agree that it's important to bring this to the community at some point, but I think time is of the essence with regard to this particular issue at this time, and I think we have to move on it now. With regard to your letter to the Premier, I take a look at the second last paragraph, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure it's germane, frankly, but the issue here is that we want to present the argument to the Premier and frame it by asking a number of questions. What are the questions that we want answers for exactly? And I think we should be a bit more precise on that.
So what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking of asking, for example, how will the future agreements be imposed? Because right now we have one agreement that was signed. What the unspoken piece is that it has yet to be imposed on the Catholic trustees. So there's a piece of the other shoe is going to drop soon. So that's one question we have to ask. And I think the second one is one that we've discussed here, and what's the future role of boards of education? And maybe a few more questions along that line, but some specific questions for her.
I'll tell you why I didn't go that route because I thought of that when I put together the letter. And what I thought was, if we're not, what we want to do is to set up a paradigm that is difficult for him to ignore. So if we get into, well, how are you going to impose, or what is the role, asking him what the role is. First of all, I don't think it's his job to define the role. And I'm more interested to know what people think about it, because I don't think that he's asked them. He's operating under his conditions. And what I wanted to do is to set it up in such a way that the final ask was something that would be, if he were to refuse, would be very easy for us to have part two, which would be, why won't you? Why are you afraid to have a conversation with Ontarians about the role of federations, school boards, trustees, the ministry? What are you afraid of? And I think that puts us in a better position, rather than saying, well, you won't be able to implement this way because, or I think that could be another letter, like if this happens, in which, I think that we're just probably weeks away from a piece of legislation, that maybe then, but if we have any hope in getting any traction with the public, I think it needs to be more specifically focused on getting people to stand up and say, oh, wait a minute, I don't want my principal being dictated by Toronto. That's where I think we have to get. Or I don't want union executives and the Premier deciding what my kids are going to learn. I just don't. I want that to be a discussion that I have a vested interest in through my locally elected trustee. And I think that's why I'm really focusing in this particular letter. And I think that probably, David, what you're talking about is that there's probably a third letter. There's probably a shorter, more pithy letter that would go to the editors. And it would be much shorter and much more concise, challenging the government to lead that variant and posing the question. And you could see that it would be, I think it would probably elicit a flurry of responses on, the various social media channels, because I think it's something that people can relate to. Wait a second here, I know that some people say, oh, we should just get rid of trustees, but just think about if we didn't have school boards and you had a problem with your local school, where are you going? You have to drive to Toronto? You have to phone them, go to a website and put in a question and hope that somebody answers it? I don't know. So I guess that's sort of what I'm thinking. I don't know, what is...
Somebody answering from another country.
Trustee McPherson?
This has been very interesting tonight. Now, getting away from the community aspect, the one thing that, and I realize, David, it's very difficult with OPSPA because of the politics involved there. This agreement with the Catholic teachers started off as a trilateral discussion, and one leg of the stool left. And yet they continued to reach what turned out to be a bilateral agreement. It would be hoped that OPSPA's determination or direction on this would be that they will stay at the table no matter how bad it starts to smell, because I think we need that representation there, that they remain part of the process. Now, I do not anticipate anything a whole lot different than what we've got, and as Greg says, it may simply be sweeping legislation within a few weeks anyway. But
See, I would disagree with you on that, Bill, and I would disagree from this standpoint that I don't think, even if OPSPA walks away from the table, that if the ministry cared about the kind of information that OPSPA would be purview to, that they couldn't obtain that somewhere else. So OPSPA's assertion that, well, we need to be there so they can ask us the questions. And what I'm concerned about is if they do hang in there, they take moral authority away from us to say, this is not our deal.
okay.
That would be my, I think OPSPA needs to think about this politically. I think it's also important, and I'm glad you brought me back to OPSPA because I meant to say this. This is not at all an attack on OPSPA. I think sometimes boards don't do this enough, where they sit down and say, we're going to write a letter through our director about, what we think the direction that they should go in. And I think that's, so I wouldn't want it thought that this is at all against OPSPA. This is using OPSPA, I think, the way it should be used. I think in reality, I don't think they have the horses to move that quickly on this. And that needs to be discussed if we manage to dodge this or it doesn't work out to be as bad as we think. If there is another day, we need to have that conversation, and our board has been there front and center for years now that OPSPA should be a much bigger, much better funded organization. So I just want to throw that out there. David?
While you move into implementation, you may want to look at the classic communication strategies and to create the groundswell necessary. One of the things you want to do, first of all, I agree with your response to Trustee McAllister. However, this is one of those times when you may want 25 questions from Trustee McAllister to the follow letter. Because what you want to do is have a layered, you want to have, first of all, you want to draw them into a conversation and then show the fact that you have some valid questions about the very nature of who's going to manage education in Ontario. I look at what Trustee McRae said just a moment ago. I can just see a mother upset with the school teacher phoning a 1-800 number in Toronto, and we'll send you the ombudsman. The ombudsman will be up there next Thursday to arbitrate your problem with the principal and the teacher, and good luck with that, and get back to us and tell us how it went. And you may think that's really, really strange, folks. It's not. I mean, as you go through it, I think what you're going to have to look at is, as David said, I don't think a public letter to a group of people who don't understand what you do is going to be that effective. But right now, I think the letter should go to each each chair of the board should get this letter, copy to Mr. McGinty and every chair. And I also believe that this is, because this is a constitutional issue, folks, that I think you should go to all the MPPs as well, as a part of this. And then the other piece that's going to go to, as you take a look at this, is that you may want to, the board, and this would be very controversial. I know the chair has been very provocative. This is one of those times when you have a Facebook campaign started that talks about, the historical, as trustee, as you know, Bill, from your own area, trustee, as you've alluded to, is older than Confederation. And we had the schoolhouse trustee before 1867, and this is known. I don't think Art was at the meeting, but it was a long time ago. And I think what you have to start to do, I think now, is the moment. Just took me back. It was even bad at golf. But I think what you have to look is a layered thing that's going to probably have 5 or 6 weeks that's going to go through to keep that going. And I think it's going to have to have a real life. I think we're going to have to use our website. And then, folks, I think you're going to put your helmets on, because I don't think this is one of those ones where, that they're going to say, oh, they're cute little guys that go on. I think this is one of those ones where you're an irritant. And what are you doing? And they're going to come down for a visit, and we have to be ready for it as you go through. So I think that as you move now with the letters, I think you have to look at strategy and how you're going to layer the strategy out.
The other sort of, I started off by saying that one of the things that one of the reasons why I wanted to convene the meeting was to double check and ensure that I was on the right direction. So I think that if we are good with the content in the letters, we're good with the strategies just laid out by David with the Dear Premier letter, we're good with the OPSPA letter. This also gives each of us and myself some authority to move forward, and I think that we've discussed figuring out ways of engaging our communities. I think that can be done individually, it can be done coordinated with the chair and vice chairs, and I think that in addition to this, I like the idea of a shorter letter that would go to editors, and I'm talking Globe and Mail too. I think we ought to send them that far, and see what we can get. I think there may be an appeal to our local MPPs. I think that the reality that we need to understand is that no government is going to state that they're not interested in more control over education. So I'm sure the other two parties are sitting there saying, well, if we just don't say anything, I'd love that kind of control, and that'd be great when we're in power. So I don't know that we should look to them as being our saviors. I think it's very much in their interest that the Education Act is strengthened and not weakened. So I don't know that that's even a useful, but I think our municipalities might be interested in the conversation, because I think that this is a conversation that they constantly are engaged in as well. So there may be an opportunity for us to reach out, and certainly any of you that have contacts with them, I would encourage you to touch base and see what their feeling is. I think we have to act quickly. I think that needs to be the way that we operate. So my plan would be is, if there's no further discussion on the content or the plan is loosely outlined, then we would adjourn this meeting and move into a committee, board meeting, and then we'll vote officially on a motion to authorize me to letter. I'm going to ask that David have his staff do a quick fact check, make sure that my interpretations. Okay.
For you, Chair?
Yep.
I just want to know, what was the time frame on sending out the letters?
They would go as soon as they were ready.
So within the next 5-7 days, are you looking at?
I would think that there would be email copies by Friday.
Okay. And then if we want to reach out to our municipal partners, for input, would that go in a secondary letter?
Well, I don't know that this is so much we would reach out for input as just sort of a challenge to invite them to be part of the conversation as to what the role of where they want their schools operated from. I think that's where we engage them.
And I mean, I think Trustee McCrae hit the nail on the head that we can resolve issues, and she gets the calls, and I'm sure we all do, that we can resolve in a few minutes or a few hours. And if it's Toronto-centric, it's going to be going through an ombudsman or something else. Mind you, I welcome an ombudsman for school boards. But I'm just kind of wondering, how are we going to get this out then in the papers and to educate our communities? What are you looking at for timeframes for that? Because it is such a complex topic. I mean, I've learned so much just listening tonight.
Right. Well, I think that's where we have to keep it really focused just on posing the question about the control. And, we can elaborate a little bit as to why we think that this is a time for the debate, but I think that we keep it pretty short. And I think that those letters can go to all our newspapers and might make up a supplementary. We will have a news release going out as well tonight, picking up many of the details from the two letters. And so that'll be going out. And then I think it's down to us. I think each of us has to kind of see this as just starting to ask the question and getting people questioning that very topic. So use whatever vehicles you have. And I mentioned the letter to the editor, so we'll do that. And then I think if we need to, we'll come back and have another conversation. If you have any other ideas, I think that you just feed them through Lisa, to David and myself, email them to the group, and we'll continue to move forward. I think that this could change a lot, right? Like if all of a sudden we have legislation, you wake up and at noon there's legislation tomorrow, that changes, some things. If all the deals are signed by the end of the week, that changes things too. So,
well, I know myself, as Trustee McPherson said, what's good for my community might not be what's best for his, and vice versa. And we are not Eastern Ontario. We're one of the largest boards, and we aren't Toronto-centric. What's good for them isn't good for us necessarily. And I'm fully supportive of your letter.
And I think that's the message we have to talk to our communities about. Trustee Carpenter, sorry.
These letters I know are in draft form, so there needs to be a little bit of tweaking on both of these letters. Sure. Okay, and I was just wondering if, in your second paragraph to the OSPA letter, should we be putting some samples of questions or guarantees that we would be looking for, or is that too specific? I mean, we say should seek some guarantees. Well, how do they know what they're thinking as far as guarantees?
Oh, I outline that then as that the directors be asked. Consider asking government negotiators to guarantee that no deal would be agreed to without signing the deal. That's essentially the guarantee.
Okay, well, maybe that needs to be referred to because I didn't read it that way.
Okay.
And your third one down below,
yep.
Number 3.
Mm-hmm. We are also appalled that the government would enter into negotiations with one employee group about the working conditions of another with no representation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not a
something
complete thought.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let David and his crack team, unless somebody wants to quickly fix it. Trustee McPherson?
Quick grammatical. Second paragraph in the OPSPA letter. That is not the case. And you have FILL, OPSPA, and I'm assuming it should be feel.
Yeah.
It's probably something that slipped through spell checking. So
I'm not a keen writer. It takes a lot of courage for me to write. Anyway.
So, through you, Chair,
Yeah.
so if you have a problem with your grammatical skills, then you'll just have to call Toronto.
Yes.
And be put on a waiting list. And it might be 6 months before you hear from the ombudsman. And then they'll come down and do an assessment. That'll take 3 more months. And so on and so on.
You'll lose it.
That's if
So
you can
much
get
for
through,
your
though.
education.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But that's if you can get through, because you have to go through, check one for this.
We laugh, but
It's the truth, though.
it,
That's
when
the way
my kids
everything's
needed,
going.
my oldest boy, he had the front suture on his skull sealant too soon, so they had to break it open. And anyway, my local doctor, she noticed it, sent him off to CHEO. They did x-rays, said, well, those local doctors, country doctors, they don't know anything, so don't worry about it. We didn't hear anything, thought that was good news. Only discovered they had lost the x-rays. When they finally found them and somebody bothered to read them, oh my goodness, we better get him in here and operate. 3 weeks later, he was under the knife with major surgery. So, like this stuff, we know what happens, right? We know what happens. Anybody else, just before we convene this or wrap this up and go into the board meeting? All right, so we need just somebody to adjourn, right? Move to adjourn. Trustee McMillan, Trustee McPherson, all in favor? What was that carried? Okay, normally I think we would try to take a quick little break, but I think if you're all right, we're going to go right through because I don't think it should take us too long. So, welcome everybody. Call the meeting to order. Roll call. Director, you want to just rattle that off quickly?
Trustee McPherson. Present. Trustee Swan. Trustee Buckland.
Present.
Trustee Petersma.
Present.
Trustee McMillan. Trustee, whatever his name is. Trustee McDonald.
Questions. Present.
Thank you, Trustee McAllister. Trustee Garrow. Trustee Gray. Trustee Kartner.
Okay.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Okay. And so student trustee Howe is not present. And trustee Richards not present. Okay, approval of the agenda. Motion, trustee McMillan, trustee McDonald. All in favor? I've totally logged out again. It's all right. Any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, there's no report from private session. Report from committee of the whole. During the committee of the whole meeting for July 25th, we discussed one item, who's in charge of the schoolhouse, and bring to the board 2 letters. One directed to the Ontario Public School Boards Association, second directed to the Premier, which will also be copied to school boards and the Ontario Legislature. Move to direct myself to send these letters. Motion to trustee McDonald, trustee McPherson. Any comments or questions? Yep.
Did you want a motion to deal with the one to the letters today? Are you just gonna?
I was just going to operate, say that was part. We can include that though.
No, that's cool. That's fine. I'm okay with it. If I think it's.
You're okay?
Yep. I didn't know if I want to make sure you didn't forget it. If you're okay with it, then I'm good. I think it frames it enough.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Trustee McAllister?
I think the municipal council should be copied, the Reeves.
Okay, on the local, don't you think we should I think we should have a separate letter for them.
Okay.
I think that we should. And so I think that we should amend the motion. What do we have? Let's just expand a little bit and pursue other communication opportunities as discussed in the committee of the whole meeting July 25th. I think that works. Is everybody okay with the mover and seconders okay with that?
Including. Maybe you could say including, don't.
But not.
I think we'll just leave it broad, and
Okay.
we've got it written down, so
Okay. Don't worry about it.
if you're okay with that, I think that's fine. All right, any other comments or questions? Trustee Kartner?
The reference we discussed about having our OPSPA director try to rally 10 others to force the issue of bringing him a meeting of the board of directors, is that a separate motion to give him guidance to do that, or just suggesting it to him?
Yeah, let's do that separate.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not consistent. I would say that's not germane. The letter does ask that, so I would assume that we would want to give them at least the first opportunity, but let's do this and then we'll talk about that quickly. That's a good point, Trustee Karkner. Any other comments? Okay, all in favor? Okay, so that carries. Are you in favor, Lisa?
Yes, I'm in favor.
Great, thank you. It's unanimous then. Okay, so let's, just on the point that Trustee Karkner raised, how do you feel about that? Do you want specific direction to try to rally 10 people to force or to call a meeting?
Yeah, I think if you want to proceed with the letter, and after a certain time, if we have no response, then potentially we can do that. I can still
Start,
I can start to gather that and certainly push it if I see nothing, but I can work on.
You could put the wording just like that. If there's no response to the letter within, and we know this is urgent, there's no response to the letter within 7 days, the chair of the board, as directed by the motion of the board, that you will work towards that. But that, Carol?
Yes.
Did you get that? That's great. You don't often draft motions, so that was pretty good.
You are a politician.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for this word.
Even if he likes to wear Art Buckland's jackets.
From the south.
Yeah, you wear nice jackets. I don't know that he can pull it off.
I have the pants to go with it.
You know what's scary? So does he. All right.
Second for my motion?
Yeah. Trustee Buckland, do you have something that you could? I suppose I could turn my monitor on. I can see what you're writing.
That'd be good.
The Upper Canada that.
I didn't get the rest of it in there, so you don't have to.
The Upper Canada District School Board will, if there is no response to the letter.
7 days.
No, not. We don't care whether there's a response because they could respond and say no, right? We still want.
If there's any action.
Does not agree to convene a meeting of the directors.
You just need 10, David?
So just highlight will from will all the way to the end of letter. Will ask Trustee McDonald. Oh, I had it. See, I only say things once.
I couldn't type that fast. There's too many more. There's another emotion on.
There's an interesting story about the way that Bono writes songs, that they apparently have to have microphones and the ability to record at any time because he creates melodies through a language they call Bongolese, and it can happen at any time and only ever happens once, and then the melody's gone. So
Speaking in tongues.
I won't go that far. All right, so that the Upper Canada District School Board will ask Trustee McDonald to initiate a meeting of the Ontario Public School Boards Association if the request from the chair goes unheeded. That's good. Goes unheeded. That's good. With a D. With a D.
I don't think that's spelled right.
Sounds good. I think we know what we're talking about.
All right.
Could we
I'll
say
just save
something,
it.
if there is no action, read the director's meeting by OBSPA, the Upper Canada District School Board will
Well, that's even better.
direct
Correct.
Director Thomas, Director
Director
McDonald to,
McDonald.
because he's a director in that
Yeah.
case. Proceed in organizing a meeting of other.
Do you have that written down?
Partially.
Okay, finish writing it down, send it up here. Please.
On my first one.
Thank you, everybody.
Can I just say it?
Yep.
If there is no action, read Emergency Directors Meeting by OSPA, the Upper Canada District School Board
Sorry, we'll get you a copy. Don't worry about it, Lisa.
directs
Oh, I thought you wanted to say
Director
it.
McDonald to contact 10 other directors to call an emergency meeting of the OSPA directors.
Sounds good. Moved by, do we have this already done?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any comments or questions? You send that, if you could just pass that down.
I'll read that.
All in favor?
In favor.
Opposed? All right, great, thank you very much. Any quick comments?
I'd like to thank Jane for coming in from holidays tonight,
Thank you.
Jane.
And doing the
Safe
writing.
trip to Nova Scotia, and good luck at the wedding.
Yeah.
And
Are
Ian,
you getting married?
we got, yeah. But just good Nova Scotia party, and Ian, we got him in off the sailboat today. Thank you very much, Ian. Lisa and I were working, so was Alice in the back.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thanks, everybody, and thanks, trustees. Thanks for giving up your evening, too, and making whatever plans. Thank you, Lisa, for stepping away from your dinner party. I understand you've got friends there. So, thanks, everybody, and I'll keep you posted. If you have any comments or questions, you know my number, and you have my email address. Motion to adjourn, Trustee McMillan, Trustee Karkner. All in favor? It's a wrap.